Welcome to the session on the Enhanced Communication on Progress questionnaire, an introduction to the environment section. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. My name is Bernard Frey, and I am a Senior Manager on Sustainability Reporting at the UN Global Compact. Today, we are also joined by representatives of the UN Environment Program, which is UN Global Compact's key UN partner for our work on the environment. Before we start, some general housekeeping for today's session. Please direct all questions to the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please take a second to locate the Q&A feature right now. Questions that will not be answered today will be answered in writing in a follow-up to the session. The session will also be recorded and made available on demand on the Academy platform of the UN Global Compact. Live transcription is also available in English by clicking on the live transcript icon. Translation for the session is available into Spanish by clicking the globe icon on the bottom of the screen. Hay traducción al español haciendo clic en el símbolo de globo abajo en su pantalla. Our aim for today is to address 4 key objectives. We can see the next slide, please. Review the overall structure and content of the Enhanced Communication on Progress questionnaire. Set the stage and hear from the UN Environment Program about the relevance for UN Global Compact participants to disclose their actions and impacts on the environment through the communication on progress. Provide context and information on the questions in the environment section of the questionnaire and answer questions you may have. Please note that the introductory part of today's session on the overall structure of the questionnaire has also been introduced in similar sessions we organized earlier this month. If you attended those sessions, please bear with us a few minutes before we deep dive into the environment section. Please let me start by emphasizing that the Enhanced Communication on Progress has been designed to provide additional value to participating companies and their stakeholders. In particular, the Enhanced Communication on Progress will help participating companies build credibility and brand value, measure and demonstrate progress on the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact and the SDGs, receive insights and learn to improve their performance and drive impact on the 10 principles, and create some comparison points against peers. Let us have a look at the overall structure of the questionnaire. The questionnaire of the Communication on Progress is organized in 5 sections: governance, human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption. The governance section provides a cross-cutting overview of the company's sustainability governance structure and processes, while the remaining 4 sections go into greater detail on topics connected to the 10 principles of the UN Global Compact. Within each section of the questionnaire, the questions are grouped in different categories as they typically address the processes and policies that demonstrate a company's commitment to advance sustainability topics connected to the 10 principles, the efforts taken to prevent negative social and environmental impact on those topics, performance indicators, and response, remediation, and reporting mechanisms to address grievances and reflect on lessons learned. These categories, commitment, prevention, performance, remediation, and reporting, are aligned with relevant frameworks, particularly the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. The questions addressing commitment, prevention, performance, and remediation practices and indicators for the areas of governance, human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption will help provide a holistic view of your company's sustainability efforts. They will also help you identify gaps and set goals to drive impact. Let us have a look now at the type of question formations that you will find in the questionnaire. Each question is structured to promote learning by embedding corporate best practices directly in the answer options. In many cases, the answer options show a progression that can showcase the company's continuous improvement year over year. For instance, in this question on the slide, the answers show different levels of action. The company can answer that having a publicly stated commitment is not a priority on the left, to answering that company has a publicly commitment that includes own operations and the company's value chain on the right. Furthermore, by using a matrix format, the participating company can compare the performance across topics, in this case, human rights, labor, environment, anti-corruption. All questions also come with an optional comment box where companies can choose to provide further commentary on the selected answers or insert links to relevant information. Other types of questions you might see include narrative submissions and quantitative metrics. At the end of each section on human rights, labor, environment, and anti-corruption, there is one narrative question where companies can briefly describe additional actions they are implementing and goals they have set to advance the 10 principles. And while all questions are mandatory, for some questions, you will have an opportunity to select answer options such as unknown or not applicable. Some questions will include the possibility to upload documents to provide evidence to the selected answers. In addition, the new system will allow you to also upload your sustainability or annual report as an attachment to the questionnaire. Uploading a sustainability or annual report is optional and not a requirement of the new communication on progress. Please also note that you will be able to download the question in Excel format in order to, among others, share it internally within your company. This was a broad overview about the overall structure and types of questions of the questionnaire. Before deep diving into the environment section of the questionnaire, we will hear about the relevance of business of disclosing on the communication on progress to help advance the UN Environment Agenda. With that, I would now like to give the floor to Alexandra Caldas, who is the Chief of Big Data Branch at the United Nations Environmental Programme, and among others, Chair of the UN Geospatial Network and member of the UN Data Governance Group. Alexandra, thank you so much for being with us today, and over to you.
Thank you, Bernard. And my first words on behalf of the UN Environment Programme is to be grateful to the UN Compact team and the extraordinary work being done. Let me just have some few words of demonstrating the relevance for the environment of this environment section on the communication on progress. First, it promotes action. Secondly, it raises transparency. And third, it leverages synergies. On promoting action, there's not been such a great challenge for humanity on emergency and the triple climate crisis, on climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution. And so the communication on progress work directly helps to build science-based solutions, to build nature-based solutions. So it contributes to direct action and to promote action. With regard to transparency and raising transparency, there's never been a time where the importance and criticality of data, information, knowledge, particularly on corporate sustainability and industry sustainability and industry awareness on the sustainability agenda, has been so much relevant. So by providing access, transparent access, it's directly contributing to raising transparency overall on the sustainability agenda. I think the third level, which is leveraging synergies. UNEP has been working with a number of partnerships. One such example, more than 40 different platforms. Of course, it's very relevant, the partnerships we have with the industry sector, in particular sectors such as energy, such as transport, such as extractives. So the work of the communication on progress is directly contributing to leverage these synergies on these partnerships. We also have a number of platforms such as the Global Finance Initiative, where we tackled more than 200 finance partners in order to tackle the net zero emissions by 2050. This gives you an example of the importance of leveraging synergies. But let me conclude what we just had a good example during UNEA and the Environmental Assembly in Nairobi this month, where all countries came to a global agreement on plastic pollution. So it's very important that the work you're doing on the different cycles, from commitment to prevention, to performance, and then to response, is so critical, going from the policy, as I'm demonstrating with this global agreement on fighting and combating on plastic pollution, but to the level of the response and the level of the partnerships engagement. So I think we have here a great opportunity for enhanced collaboration with the communication on progress. And you can count with the UNEP on all different areas of UNEP and the environment program in working with you to strengthen this environment section of the communication on progress on the UN Global Compact. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alexandra, for your remarks, and also to UNEP for its support throughout the process. Most appreciate and value it. Today, we want to now go into the details of the environment section of the Communication on Progress questionnaire. Maybe we can see the next slide. My colleagues at the UN Global Compact will walk us through the different sections of the environment section. But before going into that, it is important to note that not only the environment section of the Communication on Progress addresses aspects that are relevant to the environment. Questions in the governance section refer to processes and governance structure that also helps companies address environmental sustainability. For instance, the governance section in the questionnaire asks if the company has publicly stated policies, has implemented risk assessment processes, and has formal structures to address also environmental issues. We will not cover the questions in the governance section today, but you can access the recording of the session that we did on the governance section of the questionnaire in the UN Global Compact Academy platform. With that, we want now to go into the details of the environment section of the Communication on Progress questionnaire. My colleagues at the UN Global Compact, Mylan Ha, who is the Deputy Head of the CO Water Mandate, and Anna Krug, who is Manager on Climate, will walk us through the different questions of the environment section. Over to you, Mylan and Anna, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Bernard. And thank you for those remarks, Alexander. That's very great context for the importance of the communications progress for environmental topics and issues more broadly. Anna and I are going to actually go a little bit more detail into the environmental section. The environmental section is split into two elements. A first sequence of questions is really tailored to the questions that will be required for all member companies of the Global Compact to answer. And there'll be a separate section that will also be tailored to the specific industry sector. And those are depending on what industry sector the company is in, will be also required for those specific industry sectors. But let me first go through some of the questions related to ones that will be necessary to be answered by all participants. So the environmental sections, as Bernard had already kind of gone through as at a higher level, are split into these four elements. I'm going to go through some of the first one, starting with the commitment. And as I mentioned, this is around policy, the highest level policy. And what does that mean? Next slide. Great, thank you, Moramai. So the first one is around policy and what the policy asked is. Can you go to the next slide, Moramai? So the policy is specific, right? As policy really sets the highest level commitment for a company in terms of how it is they will be looking to integrate and address environmental risks within their particular company. And these can help the companies understand and identify the risks and opportunities, manage the beneficial environmental services and products, and mitigate the negative impacts and structure response overall. So what does this kind of look like, and what does this look like within the current COP? As it says, the way that this is structured is that it asks a general question around what is the formal policy around different topics. So depending on the different companies, the companies can first start by clicking what kind of policies they might have, whether it's in climate action, to oceans, to air pollution, to waste, et cetera, as you see here. At the same time, there's, as Bernard had talked about, there's a spectrum of how it is that you might go about answering this question. So for example of what a potential policy could look like in the water space, we have seen, right, about how companies might approach a water policy might take different forms. For the first element, what they could actually be doing is to one, understand and integrate why it is that water might be a material risk for a company. Why is water important for the company? For some companies, they might also include the acknowledgement that they've recognized that water is a human right. That the way that the company approaches the topic of water is through the lens of accepting that that the human right to water and sanitation is core, and that in that case, that kind of human rights approach will go through the entire way that the company addresses water-related issues. They might also include within that where it is that they'll look to take action on water, whether it is that they will do it in their only direct operations, whether they will be looking through supply chains, whether this will also include communities overall, and whether they'll actually look at the different dimensions of water issues, whether they're going to set targets related to the quantity of water used, whether they'll be looking to manage the water discharge to address water quality related issues, and as well as the social dimensions of water around water access, sanitation, and hygiene more broadly as well. And then for some of the most kind of what we've seen kind of far-reaching companies, so actually understand the connection between climate and water-related issues, and looking at the topic of resiliency. So they might actually acknowledge that the impacts of climate change on water-related resources, and how they might actually take action to understand the risk involved in those two areas. So the first part, as I mentioned, is just around the highest level policy and how you might address it. Next slide, Marlene. And then after that, they might answer those questions related to the policy at the highest level. They'll move into the second section around prevention in this case. And in the section prevention, it addresses 4 key topic areas, as you'll see here, from stakeholders to remedy, very much in line with the human rights, the guiding principles for human rights around how this is structured. So the next slide, I'll just go through why this is important.
And Myla, for our Spanish translator, if you may speak a little bit slower, that would be appreciated. Thank you.
Sorry about that.
No problem. It's great. Thank you.
Yep. So why are these important, right? From the first element around this, from the stakeholders. Why is stakeholder engagement an important aspect in this area? Particularly if it's a case that companies are really looking to understand where it is that they can really develop either their policies, or how it is that they might be looking to develop the response strategies to prevent the actions. They really need to engage in the most relevant stakeholders to understand what this looks like. And the stakeholder engagement can involve both internal ones for companies as well as externally for the companies, depending on what topic of issues. I'll give you some examples when we go through some of the next slides of why this is important and how to look at it through that lens. So on the first element of this, around the stakeholder engagement process, you'll see here again, there's the spectrum as you'll see here, and in the interest of how you might address this from an environmental lens, and particularly from a water lens, what we've seen how companies have addressed this issue of stakeholder engagement is that for the ones that are really looking to understand the water-related risk and impacts that they might have on local communities, you really have to engage with local communities in order to understand those impacts overall. And that is the basis for all the other response options that are related to the other questions within the questionnaire as well, right? So because water is such a locally context-dependent resource, and to really develop the mitigation strategies around it, you'll see that companies will either engage with the stakeholders within where their companies have manufacturing operations, if it's a case where the most important aspect of where the greatest water footprint is in the manufacturing processes. So that's one, communities around their own direct operations. For other companies where they've actually done and mapped the water-related risks, they'll see that it's actually not in the direct operations, but actually it's in the supply chains where this is the most relevant. And so what they'll be actually looking to do is to work within their supply chains and to work with suppliers to actually work in the stakeholders in their supply chain to understand water-related risks as well. So this kind of depends upon which the relevant companies and where they see the most relevant actions, in this case for water, in order to address and work with those stakeholders to understand risks and impacts. Next slide. Once it is that a company has established a policy, conducted the right risk and impact assessments through the actions of actually engaging with stakeholders to understand what those impacts are, what they really need to do is to then take the relevant steps to actually prevent those impacts and address. And in order before it actually becomes a significant impact to the communities and to the businesses. So the next couple of questions are really related to actually helping companies and understanding helping companies understand and also then helping companies report on both how it is that they're looking to manage those risks and also the processes in place to manage that over time, to know that they're actually working towards have instituted within the company's appropriate policy and processes that allow them to mitigate those related risks. So going back to my example earlier around the stakeholder engagement process and why that's important in the water process for addressing risk to companies. I'll just give you a couple examples of what this might look like in terms of mitigation options for response. In the water space in particular, right, you have where it is that the impacts are really likely going to be most felt is not necessarily through a single company's individual actions in a particular arena. It's actually the cumulative impacts of companies with other users, their own companies, other companies, other farmers, the public overall. It's those kind of joint impacts where it actually will likely lead to the greatest risks to local water related resources. So what does that look like then for response strategy? So they could look at different ways. So for example, in the case where the companies have seen that it's actually supply chains, where they really have the greatest, might have the greatest impacts based on the stakeholder engagement process, what they can actually look to do, right, is to develop within there, in this case, you see here, business relationships. In this case, we're talking about business relationships. In this case, I'm talking about suppliers in particular, to work with their suppliers, right, in the development of, let's say, a code of conduct. And within the code of conduct, they've actually included within that corrective action plans and building the capacity of suppliers to actually just basically understand the specific water-related issues within their supply chains overall. We've seen some of the companies also then say, they've identified that water is an issue in their supply chain, but they've also identified that it's not their own operations, but actually their operations in combination with the other farmers who are working the areas, some of which are in supply chains, many of them who are not. And the only way that they can actually really address those issues is to work collectively with others. So they develop some plans and projects that actually involve the local farmers. It involves their supply chain actors, and it involves some governments as well. And it's kind of a very broad range collective action strategy that will actually look to address the long-term water-related risk in those arenas. Another example, right, as I mentioned before, is government within this. And we've actually seen some of the companies work with municipalities around developing local water governance regulations, or local water or working with governments on, let's say, a site reuse plan, right? So that the water that's being used by the companies with the local water municipalities is actually reused for the purposes of the greater purpose of ensuring that the broader water use is actually done in a way that leads to the long-term sustainability of the local water resources overall. So that's one. So that's just examples of what the types of companies can take in terms of preventing and mitigating the aspects. Next slide. So one way to address how companies are looking to prevent and mitigate risk is through the question of whether companies are setting relevant targets, right? Whether this is setting annual targets and goals and tracking over progress or times, and what does this actually what does this mean, or what does it could this look like? So for some companies that we've seen, some of this might mean that they're setting kind of yearly targets related to, let's say, their supply chain. Or around their own direct operations. So this could be something like, I'll use water access, sanitation, and hygiene as an example. For some companies, they've decided that what they actually want to do is to ensure that all workers and the communities in which their workers live have 100% access to water access, sanitation, and hygiene by, let's say, 2030. So they'll utilize this as a mechanism to track their progress over time. And if it's a case that companies who answer E4 around setting annual targets, goals, they will be then asked to answer questions E4.1 and E4.2. If you can go to the next slide. And these can be different types of targets. So we ask what the targets mean, whether it's an absolute target or an intensity target, whether it's externally verified, if they're on track. So just an example of what absolute versus intensity targets. For the example that I gave earlier, around an absolute target, around 100% of their suppliers have ensured that there's access to water, sanitation, and hygiene for the workers. That's an example of an absolute target. Another kind of absolute target that we've seen that some companies make are they've made a commitment around 100% of communities in high stressed regions will have good quality access to water by 2030 is another example of what that looks like. An intensity related target is a little bit different. And we've seen this particularly in food and beverage industry, where they might set a target such as, they want to ensure that by, let's say 2030, that the amount of water you use for the production of let's say it's a soft drink beverage is 1.5 liters per 1 liter of water, right? So these are kind of like intensity over time. What you would want to see is that that intensity go down. So that what it means that it signifies is the use of water. You're being much more efficient in the use of water for the production of a product over time. So there's just examples of what the different types of targets look like in terms of if it's a case where a company has mentioned that they have set an annual target, as Bernard has mentioned in the chat function here, then you'll be prompted to just give a bit more example of what those targets look like year on year and how you're tracking it over time. So with that, let me turn it over to Anna.
Thank you very much, Mylan. I will now walk you through the next set of questions that are required for all reporting companies. And so question number 5 looks at remedies provided to address environmental issues. The background for this question is that even with best policies and practices, business activities may cause or contribute to an adverse environmental impact. And when such a situation is identified, it's a company's responsibility to actively engage in remediation to counteract the negative impact. A second possibility is that the business has not itself caused or contributed to the issue, but it is impacting its operations, products, or services. And here too, the business may take a role in providing remedy. One example of an environmental issue could be a waste spill, either caused by the reporting company or impacting its operations. And the remedy would include a cleanup of the affected area and waste treatment. And as most of the other questions, this question asks for a simple yes or no response for each area, or offers companies the option to select choose to not disclose. And if the company chooses to not disclose, it will be prompted to provide an explanation. Moving on to the next section, we finalized commitment and prevention and are now looking at performance. These questions are more quantitative in nature, asking for you to provide specific numbers in regards, for example, to greenhouse gas emissions, R&D investment, climate adaptation, renewable energy, and environmentally friendly products. So we look at a couple of examples. First, question 6 on greenhouse gas emissions. We all know that we need to halve emissions by 2030 and achieve net zero by mid-century. And tracking and reporting on these emissions helps to accelerate efforts and keep track of global targets. That is why all companies are asked to provide information about their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions and additional details about those emissions. Scope 1 emissions are direct, caused by the company itself, for example, from a factory it owns, it operates. Scope 2 are indirect, from electricity, steam, cooling, heating used by the company. And Scope 3 are all other emissions that occur in the value chain, both upstream and downstream. If you answer none in all 3 cases, this would mean that the greenhouse gas emissions are not measured. And same as before, if the organization selects none, it will be prompted to provide an explanation. For measurement methodology for scope 1, 2, and 3, please refer to the GHG protocol, which is linked in the guidebook to this questionnaire. Scope 3 emissions, of course, can be difficult to accurately measure, and many companies report partial emissions, and that's why we have the answer option partial for scope 3 in this questions. If you choose this option, a follow-up question will appear, asking you which parts of scope 3 emissions you are able to measure to make the data more transparent and comparable. Moving on to the next question. This is around the role of business in the development and dissemination of new technologies, including low carbon products and services. So what percentage of the company's revenue was invested in research and development, R&D, of low carbon products and services during the reporting period? To calculate this metric, organizations divide the R&D budget allocated to low carbon products by total revenue for the reporting period and express it as a percentage. And we define those products and services as low carbon that lead to an absolute reduction in greenhouse gas emissions or reduced carbon intensity of an activity. Examples include innovations in the building sector to develop low carbon steel or low carbon cement, but also areas such as insulation, biofuels, battery recycling, smart grids, etc. And of course, here you can also choose unknown if the R&D expenditure is not easily mapped to low carbon products and services. Question 8 looks at how companies are acting to adapt to climate change impacts already occurring now and how they prepare and build resilience for future events. This can be in the company's own operations, supply chain, communities in which the company operates, or also by providing funding. Organizations should select all activities related to climate adaptation that apply. And same, you can select unknown if it's unclear which actions, if any, it has taken to support climate adaptation. Question number 9 is about renewable energy consumption as a percentage of total energy consumption in the reporting period. So here we are again back to a simple percentage. In question 10, we are looking at environmentally friendly products. And we aim to get a sense of what percentage of total revenue comes from environmentally friendly products. So it follows a similar format than the previously shown question on R&D. Environmentally friendly products are less polluting, use resources in a more sustainable manner, recycle more of their waste, and handle residual waste in a more acceptable manner than other technologies. They can range, for example, from recyclable packaging to energy efficient appliances. So with this question, the segment on questions to all participating companies ends, and I'll hand back over to Mylan to introduce you to additional questions that are only for companies operating in certain sectors. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. So as we mentioned, the first segment that we've just gone through are the ones that were applicable to all companies. These next set of questions are only going to be applicable depending on which sector your company is in. So these ones cover the topics of water, waste, air pollution, land use, and biodiversity. Next slide. For now, all companies will be shown this question in order to determine which sector and whether additional questions will be relevant to you. In the future, as our system is updated, this will actually be automated and will only appear if a company indicates that they are from a diversified sector, and then in which case we'll be choosing specific options. But for now, this will appear for all companies. And the way that this is actually what this chart actually shows is basically how we've mapped the different sectors against which potential topics a company might need to answer. You see, this is actually very hard to read, but the sectors on the left-hand side cover everything from automobile parts, banks, to chemicals, to utilities, and then within that we've actually included subsectors depending. For those elements, whether in the case of automobile parts, or actually that's not a good example, but let's say it's an insurance. There's life insurance and health insurance, and so forth. There's subsectors that are indicated, and within each of those subsectors, there are the different questions. So an example of this is if the case where your company is a food producer, you'll be prompted to be asked additional questions on water and land use, for example. So you just see this, and this is actually included in the guidebook as reference to explain why those different, to explain which of these questions are most relevant for the sectors. Specifically, the subsector tailored questions aim to really just look at quantitative related metrics and issues. I won't go through the details of what each of these are. You'll see what they're listed here are, and more details around the specific calculations of how you get to this, as well the guidance. These questions are all, which are all based on existing frameworks or reporting standards, are all included in the guidebook that accompany the communication in progress. This is just a high-level overview that shows you what types of questions are going to be asked. Again, these are all meant to be quantitative in nature to enable for broad understanding and sharing. Finally, to end this section, overall, you'll be asked to provide additional questions that you think might be relevant for the reporting period of what the company might be doing to address your specific environmental activities, actions, risks, and performance. And so this is the broad question, as I mentioned before. It is really meant to provide additional context in the case that there are other elements or other aspects of the company's performance over the prior period that was not captured in the questions that were included in the required ones. It is an open text box in order to provide that additional context for the companies. With that, let me turn it back over to Bernard.
Thank you so much, Mylan and Anna, for the introduction. And indeed, you can find more information in our guidebook, including definitions. There are a few questions in the Q&A chat regarding definitions and terminology. We have a glossary, which we will also be further developing and increasing over time, but please feel free to have a look. And again, to reiterate that the sector-specific questions that Mylan has mentioned, water, waste, air pollution, biodiversity, those questions are of numerical nature, and we have calculation guidance in our guidebook that will help you to answer those questions. Here to say also that there are different resources that may help you better understand, act on, and disclose on the issues related and referred to in the questionnaire. And you can find also these resources in the guidebook of the communication on progress that we have shared with all of you. With that, we can go to the next slide. And please keep the questions coming through the chat. We will be happy to answer them. And I also want to take the opportunity to thank again UNEP for being here, and not only Alexandra Caldas, but also our colleagues from the private sector unit, Mohamed Babruk and Mia Turner, with us today. Thank you also for joining us. We have been answering a few questions related to terminology on how to define low carbon products, environmentally friendly products. We have shared the definitions that we also have in the guidebook in the chat. And there is one question of a consultancy firm, if consultancy services per se could be seen as low carbon services in itself. I'm not sure if my colleagues from UNEP or have a response to that, but I'm not sure that actually consultancy services fully apply to the definition that we have in the guidebook on low carbon products and environmentally friendly services. And please keep other questions coming. Thank you.
So I can provide a little bit of context on this question, specifically on the R&D technologies and services. We took this question from CDP guidance, and there's quite a few different taxonomies that we've listed in the guidebook, such as the low carbon investment registry taxonomy, climate bonds taxonomy. I would suggest referencing some of those. If you would feel comfortable reporting this to CDP, if you also use that as a reporting framework, then I think that it would be applicable in this context. But the intention really is to understand what R&D is directly being linked to reducing carbon emissions. It relates to the 10 principles directly. And so, you know, if there's questions or concerns, you can create some commentary in the optional text box, but we'd invite you to look at the guidebook to understand which of these are acceptable.
Thank you very much. We're gonna give it half a minute or 1 more minute to see if there are other questions in the chat. Thank you also to all the participants for attending us today. As you know, we have organized similar sessions on the sections of the governance and the human rights and labor sections of the questionnaire before. Today we are organizing the one on the environment, and tomorrow we will go into the section on anti-corruption. You can attend tomorrow's session also live, but also access all these sessions on demand on the Academy platform of the UN Global Compact. If there are no more questions coming, then I would like to thank again all our speakers from UNEP and at the UN Global Compact, and also all attendees for participating today. Please continue looking at the resources provided through the website and continue joining the sessions, also on demand again on the Academy. And we thank you very much for being with us today and look forward to seeing you in the coming sessions. Thank you, Alexander and colleagues.
Thank you. Grateful.
Goodbye, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.